Our next speaker, again another pre-record, is Roger Baxter, Chief Executive Officer of the Minerals Council of South Africa. Roger was appointed CEO of the Minerals Council in 2015. He has 28 years of high-level advocacy and strategy experience in the business and mining sectors. He was involved in the first mineral policy discussions with the ANC in 1992 and has participated and often led discussions on all aspects of mining, economic, investment, transformation and tax policy with government. He has played a key leadership role in rejuvenating the brand of the Minerals Council and brings material leadership, governance, strategy, investment and transformation skills to the table. He was recently awarded the SAIMM Brigadier Stokes Platinum Medal for his contribution to the South African mining sector. And this is Roger's presentation.
Well, a very good afternoon to you, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate the opportunity and thanks to the organizers again of Africa Down Under. We certainly see it as a very important conference on the calendar, on the mining calendar, particularly in relation to the African mining sector. So great privilege to be here and to join you. Today, I'm going to give a very brief presentation. The idea behind the presentation is just looking at some of the work that we've been doing in not only reviving the South African economy, but obviously also then reviving the South African mining industry. So I've split the presentation into three quick areas, and I'm going to quickly go through each of them. I think the first one is important to state that, and just give a little bit of a sense of the response that we've put in place in the South African mining industry. We currently have 362,000 workers back at work out of a normal workforce of 448,000 people. And clearly putting in place a proper risk-based approach to managing the pandemic has been a key angle. So let me jump into that. I mean, I'm going to talk about reviving the national economy and a bit, obviously, on the mining sector in a moment or two. But on the COVID-19 response, I just want to make the point that South African mining sector is certainly one of the more organized sectors in the economy. When a black swan event of this sort of nature hits you, it's a novel virus, it's unprecedented socioeconomic disruption. No one has the answers, but we certainly have the systems in place, particularly the risk-based systems. And so what we did is we put in place a risk-based approach with all the right preventative controls, all the right mitigating controls to make sure that we could manage this pandemic as best we can. We had a significant amount of engagement and cooperation with government and the trade unions in South Africa, because as we say here, it's not only about saving lives, it's also about saving livelihoods. So just a couple of the elements, clearly risk-based approach. We put in place a number of preventative measures, proper risk assessments of workplaces, proper risk assessments of vulnerable employees, not allowing people over the age of 60 or with comorbidities to come back into the workplace. Very careful management of cases, including proper screening, isolation, testing, quarantining, and obviously tracking and tracing, and our systems have actually worked quite well there. And then also a lot of collaboration amongst the companies, not only among themselves, but also with local government and with national government and provincial government on the issue. We, as far back as February, had already issued some guidance to our members about managing the COVID-19 crisis. By March, we had adopted a 10-point plan on how to manage it, risk-based approach, preventative and mitigating measures. And without going into all the different details of these things, by April, we had agreed with government, a set of standard operating procedures that were ultimately gazetted as requirements of companies in the way that they managed the pandemic and managed employees in terms of a mandatory code of good practice. We also then obviously published ideas around how you deal with vulnerable populations that we talked about a bit earlier. The industry embarked on a significant exercise to improve our testing capability, and that was sometime in June and continued for the next couple of months, and that was helping particularly the private sector laboratories pick up their testing capability. We had our own outreach programs into indigenous communities, and significant progress was made there, in providing not only educational materials, etc., but obviously also hand sanitizers, water, food parcels, etc., to help manage the particular process. We had a particular medical program that was also implemented in the Eastern Cape province, helping to provide oxygen to some of the key hospitals. Even though the Eastern Cape is not a key mining district, it is a major labor sourcing district for the mines, up in the northwest, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, etc. So maybe my last point on this is to say that we have 362,000 workers back at work. We have tested 56,000 people based on our numbers released this week. We have 18,000 positive cases, and unfortunately, we've had 192 deaths, which is lower than the national average. And our testing rate is currently sitting at about 12%, of the people that we've taken through from a screening perspective, which is higher than the international average and obviously higher than our national average from a testing perspective. Moving rapidly on, I think the impact on South Africa's economy has been profound. And I think this particular slide really emphasizes, in fact, even before COVID-19 hit South Africa's economy, we had been growing at below potential for much of the past decade. South Africa took a big hit after the global financial crisis in 2009, and we didn't get ourselves back on track to the extent that we possibly should have. But I think what COVID-19 has done is create a unique opportunity to try and to enable government, industry, organized labor and communities to embark on a program to really get the industry back on track. This is a few slides on the impact. We're expecting about an 8% hit on GDP this year. We've seen more than 2.2 million jobs being lost in the economy, and obviously it's had a big impact on potential GDP in the bottom right-hand side of the chart. In terms of mining, mining remains a very central component of South Africa's economy, 8% directly, but if you include all our links to the steel and engineering industry, construction, transport, and if you add in the multipliers, probably as much as 40% of the economy in some way or another has attribution back to the role of the mining sector. So our view is mining is critical, as it is in Australia and as it is in many other African countries, and it can play an ongoing important role in reviving the South African economy. A couple of quick slides on GDP. Mining's share of GDP is now sitting at just below 8%, although on a nominal basis it has actually been increasing. You can see in this particular slide on commodity prices, mining sales and exports that we obviously took a very big hit in April, May. We've seen somewhat of a recovery because of the depreciation in the rand exchange rate, and that's obviously helped us from a sales, particularly from an export sales perspective. On the gross and net fixed investment in mining, you can see the numbers here. We are back to where we were a decade ago in terms of our real investment numbers, but most of that investment is sustaining investment in existing operations. It's not new investment in new operations, and I'll get onto a conversation we've been having with Minister Mantashe and his DMRE team and government at the moment. I think this is a particularly important slide. If you look at the red line in particular on this particular chart here, you can see the huge impact of COVID-19 in terms of the production hit, but obviously lots of work done to try and make sure we got the industry back. And I'm pleased to say that by August, the latest available numbers, mining production was pretty much back to where we were pre-COVID-19, which obviously is important. In terms of the economy, we were in an economic crisis before COVID-19 hit. What COVID-19 has done is give us a unique opportunity as South Africa to use, as much as it is a humanitarian crisis, to give us the opportunity to engage on a number of the critical issues to get the economy back on track. So we've done a whole bunch of work as business. We've been involved in a set of significant engagements with the president, several members of cabinet, organized labor and others to try and help develop what they call an economic reconstruction and recovery plan, and I'll get into that in a moment. But just to highlight, I think certainly from the business side, we think that growing the economy 3 to 5% going forward is going to be critical to get ourselves out of the current challenges we face. And looking at an economy in 2030, the bottom right-hand side of the slide, we think that there are certain things that need to be put in place to enable us to achieve that, and in particular around how we improve the competitiveness of the economy going forward. On the left-hand side, there's a chart which basically is South Africa's potential growth. It's made up of total factor productivity growth, and it's made up of capital investment and obviously human capital accumulation. You can see the underperformance of South Africa's economy over the course of the last decade, but you can see in that first decade of of this particular century, from 2001 right through to 2008, the South African economy was growing at 4.5% per year, with significant investment and productivity growth. So as business, we've certainly been engaging government on the need to look at all the different measures around improving our competitiveness, and I'll get into some of those in a moment. And these are around this sort of matrix that we've developed around policy certainty and stability, enhancing the capacity of the state, dealing with reforms to our state-owned enterprises, really tackling the corruption and crime issue, and really driving a very pro-growth type agenda. I don't have time to get into all the different aspects on this particular chart, but I think after all, we do need to compete with the rest of the world, and we are looking at how we can bring in more capital into South Africa going forward. So we had a presidential seven-aside leadership team in NEDLAC, the National Economic Development Labour Council. Minister Mantashe himself was involved as one of the 7 cabinet ministers. I sat in the team from the side of business. That task team was also included organised labour and communities. The focus was on short-term measures to stabilise the economy. Significant discussion took place, and there were agreed areas that where in the short term things could be tackled to enable a stabilisation of the situation, and obviously to look at how we could revive the economy. There was also agreement in that task team on the need for a much more detailed conversation on the structural and institutional reforms that we need to put in place as a country in the more medium term to make South Africa, a much more attractive investment destination. Government then in October produced their Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, having had the inputs from the NEDLAC 7 aside. The key sort of points coming out of the government program are to a big infrastructure drive, a 1 trillion rand state-driven infrastructural program, a large focus on local procurement and localization of procurement. So they've asked business to go back and look at areas where we can encourage much greater localization for industrialization. There are focal points on network industries, for example, on sorting out some of the challenges on the electricity supply side, encouraging investment in the economy, etc. And we obviously are urging government to focus more extensively on the issues around investment and competitiveness. On the mining side, we've had significant engagement with the DMRE and the minister in particular and his DG. Some of the points that we're talking about, which are constraining the sector, a shared vision. We've had ongoing electricity supply challenges for much of a decade, logistical bottlenecks, areas of regulatory uncertainty, some areas around cost competitiveness and the fact that we're not modernizing quickly enough. We haven't been doing enough to promote investment and exploration in South Africa. We've had a number of community-related challenges, and we have had an impact of crime on the sector. But all of these create opportunities for industry, government to work closely on solving the issues. There's a bit of work going on the idea of a more shared vision and getting communities involved. On regulatory reform, the government have agreed to halve the licensing times on exploration and on mining authorizations. On modernization, there is a co-funded model in the Mandela Mining Precinct around what we do to help modernize the sector. On infrastructure, it's really important to emphasize that there's now agreement, and the minister and there's been some recent documents published about enabling self-generation by mining companies of electricity for own use, and an easing of the regulatory constraints that have been in place undermining us so far. Pleased to say that some of those issues are being dealt with, and there's an ongoing discussion with the minister and his team. On community development, there is agreement between government and ourselves on co-sharing around social labour plans, and we need to work more closely with municipalities. The DMRE DG has indicated that government are going to develop a brand new exploration strategy within the next 3 months, and the idea there is to obviously make South Africa a much more attractive place. We want to get our share from 1% of global total, which is about $100 million a year, up to $300 to $500 million a year in the next 3 to 5 years. So a lot of work to do there. There is a joint effort around how we deal with some of the crime issues affecting mining. It doesn't just affect mining directly, it also affects service providers like Transnet in terms of provision of rail services. And again, we've had some detailed discussions in the last 2 months on that issue. And then lastly, you've got to have something to sell when you promote a country and an industry. I think the COVID-19 crisis has given us a unique opportunity to start making some good progress on a number of areas. We do have a series of working teams that are looking at each of these areas and how we accelerate reforms, both short-term, medium-term, and longer-term. We're certainly not out of the woods yet in terms of getting South Africa back into a much more competitive position, but obviously we're encouraged by the discussions that are going on, specifically with Minister Mantashe and his DMRE team to get the industry back on track. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention, and we will be involved in a session fairly shortly, a panel session where we're looking forward to your questions. Thank you very much.